Okay, good evening everyone and welcome. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so welcome to everyone on YouTube. Elected members unable to join the meeting in person are able to join remotely. However, they do not form quorum. We will not be able to vote. Their attendance will not be officially recorded, although their virtual attendance will be noted in. Non-voting independent members ideally attend in person, but if unable to join the meeting in person are also able to join remotely. They retain courage to turn their camera questions. Meeting etiquette, please may I ask that you wish to speak your physical hand. Please note that the chat function on Zoom will not be used in this meeting and questions or comments on the agenda pack should be raised via the chair. I would like to formally record the committee's thanks to our auditors, Ernst & Young, for their training session on the audit plan last Monday, the 21st of September. Thank you. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence and substitutes. Apologies from Councillor Paul, Councillor Penton, and from Councillor Booker, who cannot attend in person, but is on. Hello, Councillor Booker. We have been joined by Councillor Sali Pontin, who is a substitute member for Councillor Penton. Welcome, Councillor.
Thank you.
Declarations of interest. To those members who are present physically, are there any declarations of interest? Thank you. Item 3, minutes of the last meeting. Members are requested to consider and agree the accuracy of the decisions and minutes of the last meeting of the Audit Committee held on the 27th of July 2023. I note one amendment being that the independent member, Coulson Seth, is recorded as being both present and as giving apologies. The latter is correct. Are there any other matters of accuracy? Thank you. Are the minutes agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Item 4, action log. The committee is asked to note the contents of the action logs and the actions to be closed at this meeting. Are there any questions on the actions in the report?
Chair, may I ask, A773,
Yes.
do you have the information that you need from colleagues on this committee? It's in relation to clarification on the assurances in Poplar.
No, because that we were meant to go back as a committee and decide what information we wanted.
Okay.
And we haven't done that. And just to note the target date, that was the original date of the next audit committee. But Pauline, could we note that they're revised to November?
Oh, to November.
Yes. So all of the 11th of October dates, could they be revised, please? So no, Councillor Chadder, I'll send an email out.
Thank you.
So that we can get clarification and the information as requested.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. Andrew Ward, Deputy Director of Finance. For actions 163 and 164, we had a target date of today. I'd just like to have the information's been gathered, but I haven't submitted it as a sort of cohesive answer to the committee. I will undertake to do so as soon as possible.
Okay, could you try by the end of next week, please?
Indeed, yeah.
Thank you. If you could note that, please, Pauline, by the next week's the 5th. We could have that, please. Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. Members present in the room, I see by a show of hands, is the report noted? Thank you. Item 5, External Audit Plan Pension Fund 2022-23. I invite the officer Andrew Ward to give a brief introduction to the report. I will then open the floor to questions. Andrew, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So you'll see in the pack a short cover report and then the actual pension fund audit plan. This plan wasn't available for the previous audit session that we attended. In terms of what's in the plan, I'd sort of quickly remark there is, I think, one substantial change from the previous year's plan, which relates to the triennial valuation of the pension fund that took place. Last triennial valuation was as of 31st of March 22. It did show that the pension fund had now obtained 100% funded status. I did say it's a sort of change to the previous plan, it's sort of in actual fact, and with some regret, the fact that the audit wasn't closed at that point means that our audit colleagues did do a substantial amount of work in the end for that year on the triennial valuation to just give assurance on that. So I suppose, not a huge change in practice from what had happened the previous year. I'll give way to EY to answer any questions on the audit plan or present any other points they want to make.
Okay, if we say a few words, Chair. Yep. So Andrew's given a good introduction. I'll pass over to Karen in a second just to walk you through the risks so you understand the key risk areas. The one area we'll pick up is just the change in the team, that being myself. So David on the part this year for the new pension fund, taking over from Kevin. In some respects, I'm probably a more familiar face than Kevin because I've been doing the new council audit for 5 years, and I have had previous experience on the new pension fund. So hopefully that gives you some assurance that I'm capable to take that role up. If I pass over to Karen, she'll just run you through the risks in the plan.
Thank you, David. Good evening, Chair, members of the Audit Committee and management. I am pleased to present this evening the audit plan for the 2023 audit of Newham Pension Fund. Our audit plan sets our approach in conducting the 2023 audit procedures to ensure that the financial statements of the pension fund are free from material misstatements. My discussion of the audit work will mainly focus on the overview pages, but I am more than happy to take any questions from the committee on the other sections of the report. If I may start in page 31 of the agenda pack, this table sets out the areas of the financial statements where our audit planning procedures identified higher risk of material misstatements and where we will perform additional procedures to address those risks. It sets out the type of risks and whether there are any changes in comparison to prior year and provide a bit of details of the actual risks. However, Section 2 provides further details on those risks. So the first risk is the management override of controls. This is basically a standard risk and the risk that we recognize in every audit. That management has the ability to override or manipulate accounting records. There are some standard procedures that we are required to carry out, and we will be carrying out those procedures the same as prior year. The second risk is the valuation of the complex investments, particularly level 3 investments, which relates to the unquoted pooled investment vehicles and private equity. There is a significant balance on these investments in the statement of accounts. However, there is no change. As mentioned a while ago, there are no changes in the risk focus from prior year. So for level 3 investment, we attach significant risks since judgment are taken by investment managers to value those investments since the value is not publicly available. So due to the complexity of the measurement and estimation involved on this type of investments, there is a risk that this may be materially misstated. So basically, our procedures will include challenging the robustness of the assumptions used by obtaining the audited financial statements, fund control reports, and certain or recent transaction history, rather than just agreeing those values with the source. The third risk is related to the higher risk of the valuation for level 2 investments. So the pension fund accounts has significant value of level 2 investments. For these investment types, we attach higher inherent risk since judgment are also taken by the investment managers to value those investments. But unlike level 3 investments, level 2 investment consists of mixed types of investments wherein the sources can be quoted or some of the sources are unquoted. So we will be also performing procedures, which is a combination of agreeing to the sources and some which are related to level 3 investments as well. Then the last risk in page 32 of the agenda report, as mentioned a while ago, this is the new risk that we have for 2023 and relates to the triennial valuation, which only happens every 3 years. So we consider this to be a focus area following the full fund valuation around the estimation process. So we will be testing the inputs used in the valuation. And if I may go to page 33 of the agenda pack, here we set out our materiality levels. Our planning materiality is 17.1 million, which is basically based on 1% of the 22-23 net assets. We don't have any changes in the basis of setting out our planning materiality from prior year. Our performance materiality is basically the amount we use to determine the extent of our audit procedures, and this is set at 75% of our PM or 12.75 million. This is the upper end of the range, which is a reflection of the level of adjustments that we have noted in prior year. Our SAD nominal amount is set at 850K, so we will report any uncorrected adjustments above this amount. If I may go through page 35 of the agenda pack, we just want to discuss some or provide highlights on the additional audit scope for 2023 audit, which relates to the impact of the ISA 315 and ISA 240. So for ISA 315, the main changes actually relates to the work consideration given to the relevant application or IT systems used in the processing of the transactions of the pension fund. While for ISA 240, actually our approach already embedded these changes, but the key element is the mindset move from corroborating to challenge and skepticism. If I may go through page 36 and in section 6, since this the agenda pack that you have has been provided in the previous audit committee meeting, it provides actually a provisional timeline for the audit, but due to the continued pressure across the sector, this is likely to move back. But we are working with the pension fund team to deliver the audit. In page 58, I just want to note the slight error in the first reference to note 2 in 4th row. So this should refer to note 3 concerning the changes in the scope. Please note that this section relates to our fee that we have performed to address the related risks in the audit. And it's important for us to report based on how much it's cost us to deliver the audit work. However, the final fee is being determined by PSAA. And I will take a pause for that. And if you're happy to take questions from the committee members.
Questions? Councillor Chowdhury?
Thank you for that. So the materiality, I'm guessing, is set standard of 1% every year, right?
Yeah, I mean, it can change based on risk factors as a benchmark we apply, but all things being equal, unless that changes, then it will be a fairly standard. So it's the same basis that we've had for the last 5 years on the pension fund.
Does the debt sort of overspend of the council at the moment, would that not affect the materiality? So 17 million would be, seems to me like a large number for a materiality threshold for a publicly funded organisation that's in debt.
Yeah,
Or is overspent,
so this materiality is just for the pension fund financial statements. So this is based on the pension fund accounts. So when we come to audit the council's accounts, we'll set a different materiality level to reflect the risk and the profile of the council.
Are they not linked? So if the council can't pay for its day-to-day services for no risk vote going,
Yeah,
the bankrupt will not cover the pension obligations or anything like that.
the pension fund accounts are part of the council's consolidated accounts, but they're almost a standalone part of those pension fund accounts. So the council can't draw off of the investments of the pension fund. It's a separate, almost like a separate entity that has a separate audit associated with it. So the two aren't joined.
It also has a separate bank account. It's not the same. So the materiality level, as you said, this relates just to the pension fund.
If there's an error of 15 million, let's say, you wouldn't cover it, you wouldn't pick it up.
Sorry.
If there's like an error of 15 million, you wouldn't pick it up, right?
Or we would report it. Yeah. So the SAD level that Karen referred to is our reporting level, which is a lot lower than materiality. So if we find an error above that and it's not adjusted, then we would report it. The upper materiality level is, okay, if we find an error above that and it's not adjusted, we essentially qualify those set of accounts. So we set a high level and then we set a testing level and then we set a reporting level. So essentially if you...
What is the testing level again?
Sorry.
What is the testing level?
Testing level is...
12.75 million.
Yeah.
What was it? 1.75?
12.
12.75, yeah.
So set at 75% of the upper level.
Sorry, could you just go back to, I think it was page 31, and if you go through the levels again and just explain what they relate to and how that works, that might be helpful.
Yeah. For level 3 investments, so we the council has level 1, level 2, and level 3 investments in hierarchy. So for level 1 investments, we haven't discussed them since these are related to investment. So the value of those investments.
Sorry, Karen, 33, page 33, that has the,
Materiality levels.
Oh, sorry.
yeah, so if you explain that.
Oh, okay. So for the planning materiality, the 17.1 million. So basically that's the materiality level that we have in the statement of accounts as a whole. And then we have this 12.75 million performance materiality where we based our testing. And then for the audit differences of 850K, this actually our SAD, or in case that we have noted certain errors in the accounts, we will report anything above 850K.
Should say with a pension fund, because a lot of the individual funds are material straight away, we end up testing probably plus 90% of investment balances, which is the main part of the pension fund accounts.
Sorry, Conrad, please.
Just if it's helpful, I mean, the practical consequence of this for the committee, I think, is that what the auditors are saying is that any mistakes greater than £850,000 in the pension fund accounts would be reported to the committee. I mean, one doesn't know for certain. Quite difficult to imagine the circumstances in which we wouldn't correct the draft accounts for an error that was identified in that way. I guess what the auditor is saying is that they would report those to you so that you could form a view if, for whatever reason, the council decided not to adjust for that. For instance, I don't know, I suppose we had a disagreement on the correct accounting treatment or something like that. You might regard this as an error, we might not, and then the committee would have the information before it in order to take a view. But 17 million is, if you like, the upper limit. So beyond that point, it's going to be a substantial difference. The auditor would not be prepared to sign the accounts in any form other than a qualified or disclaimed form for the sake of that level. If that helps to sort of illustrate in practice what might happen.
750K error would not be reported.
I believe that's right.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
all transactions. It's not like I'm trying to think if there was some sensitivity to like multiple of these below 850K errors.
so multiple, yes. So if we identified several 750K differences in the same area, it's the cumulative effect on the accounts that we assess it. It's not the individual transaction level. And if we identify an error, we then do additional work to determine whether there's a similar error within that population that we haven't identified. So there's different levels of work to pay depending on what we find.
Sometimes the type of error can be extrapolated depending on what that error is. So if it looks like something that there's going to be a pattern, they'll extrapolate it and say, actually, the value is not 750. And you look at the pattern, is actually a lot more than that.
My experience of auditing the pension fund, the only differences we tend to get, and these have always been amended in the past, is that some of the, I think it's like private equity funds, the accounts when they're produced together is based on an estimate because they haven't got the final accounts for those equity funds. They come a few months later. If that's still within the audit period, which it is in this case, then sometimes they are different by a material value. But the pension fund has always corrected the accounts in those sense.
Can I ask a question? The errors and patterns that you're looking for when you're looking for discrepancies or the kind of errors you're talking about, is that still undertaken forensically by an accountant or by personal eye of overseers, or is it undertaken by software?
So it's undertaken by ourselves unless it's so I suppose if it was like a property investment, then we'd use our real estate colleagues to form their views. It depends on the nature of the investment as to whether we need to bring in specialists. The work will be undertaken by us, and that will be referenced to the kind of procedures that Karen was talking about in terms of what level the investment is, whether it's quoted. So it's quite easy for us to verify the quoted price. If it's not unquoted, then we'll do other work, and that work could be around control reports associated to the fund manager. We'll look at the latest audited accounts in relation to that fund. If that's not available at corresponding period end, then we'll take the latest one and look at cash flow forecasts. So this is varying procedures that we'll carry out depending on what the fund is and obviously the investment risk associated with it.
Okay. And the sorry, through the chair, I'm so sorry.
Don't worry.
And the because of some of the horror stories that we've heard in the past about funds managers, is there a lot more work done by the overarching companies and corporations that manage those fund managers, as well as by yourself as well?
I guess you kind of got this triangulation. You've got the pension fund management team, you've then got your custodian, then you've got your fund managers. There's different sources there, and we tend to triangulate that evidence to make sure that it's a consistent picture. When we then start to look at individual fund managers, we'll look at the control reports. So that's the external auditors to those fund reports. We'll look at their governance procedures, and they'll provide reports which provide assurance over the key controls within that fund manager's operations, so that it's quite a regulated industry, and there's a number of different sources that we'll look at in order to triangulate that evidence.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Chowdhury, then Councillor Chadha, please.
I think it's nice to remember the year before the council declared a climate emergency. Has there been any climate related divestments from the pension fund? I know you do you reassess the value of the pension fund on that basis? Has there been any changes in the past couple of years since that declaration was made?
Yeah, it's probably more of a question for officers, because I think that's on the pension fund's investment policy.
Oh, this is the ghost.
That's not the answer.
They're everywhere.
Yes, Conrad, please.
So, I mean, in terms of the pension fund and how it's invested, and I don't have the precise figures to hand, if try and look them up for the meeting or else help out. But Newham has for some years prior to the declaration of climate emergency been pursuing an active policy of divestment of the pension fund from carbon related assets. I know that we are in the top 10%, and I think now probably significantly better than that actually, performing funds within the local government pension scheme. So we have the smallest proportion, or one of the very smallest proportion of carbon related assets. I think, but I would want to check the figure. Certainly the last time I checked, the remaining assets that didn't meet that criteria were valued at somewhere under £20 million. I know that sounds an awful lot of money, but we have to remember that when there's 1.7 billion of assets invested, and the reason that those assets we have not yet divested ourselves of them is the long and illiquid nature of those assets. So it would not yet be possible to do so except at a loss. I can try, and Andrew may have them. I can try and look up the more precise numbers. But I mean, so we were very well positioned before the declaration of the climate emergency. We would like to sort of strip out that remaining bit, but we won't do so at a loss to pensioners. To date, we'd be able to do that consistent with improved financial returns. Indeed, you see that whereas a few years ago the fund was relatively well funded, but not fully funded, it is now fully funded.
Thanks, Conrad. Councillor Chadha, please.
This is going to sound like a really silly question.
No silly questions. No silly questions.
So, should we be worried that a triannual valuation is happening so quickly a year after? I don't quite understand what a triannual valuation is.
Andrew, please.
So the triennial valuation, it's looking at the expected returns, I suppose, on the pension fund versus the future liabilities, and trying to see how they match up against one another. So it's undertaken every 3 years, and it's undertaken, they look at numbers as of a point in time, and that point in time was the 31st of March 2022. It takes a little while to do the work. So the results of that triennial valuation came through to us, I think, around January this year. I may have got that slightly wrong, but it takes some time for that work to come through. So that then forms the basis. What gives us a funded figure, and it's next reviewed in 2025. So it doesn't come around terribly quickly.
I think probably, sorry, Andrew's understanding is why is the pension fund 1 year after? I think that's the explanation is needed.
Sorry.
No, it's good to explain what the triennial valuation is, but I think Councillor Chadha's point is that 1 year after the triennial valuation, why are you doing? They're not doing it again. The auditors have to review that work 1 year afterwards.
Oh, okay. So,
It's because of the timing that Andrew talked about. So for the 31st of March 22 accounts, even though the triennial valuation is dated 31st of March 22, it doesn't get the results for several months after that.
that's 3 years. Yeah.
There's a disclosure within the 22-23 accounts, and then the years in between, essentially they do a roll forward exercise. But at the triennial valuation, that's where they basically reset the position. So they look at all the membership data and recalculate the liabilities going forward.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Booker?
Thank you. This isn't a question for the auditors, it'll be for the officers, and it may not be appropriate within this agenda item or this meeting for that matter. But it looks as though we're coming towards the end of the 5-year contract with PSAA, and just wondering whether we're planning to stay with them or whether there's when that comes up for us to think about. Thanks.
Conrad, please.
So I'm just trying to think of the date. I mean, it must have been something like 18 months ago. So preceding the 22 election, there was a discussion at the audit committee to continue with the PSAA reprocurement. I'm trying to think, and David might be able to help me out. That contract will expire. I can't remember the date offhand. I mean, it's not any time terribly soon, is it? It's
the first year will be 23-24, and it's a 5-year contract from that point. Yeah,
it'll be a 5-year contract from 23-24. I mean, for me, I think the next item on the agenda, which deals with the sort of council's accounts, main accounts rather than pension fund accounts, and an audit thereof, can only be seen in the national context, which is not a terribly pretty national context, and the kind of discussion around the PSA contract and how that has or hasn't worked is, if I may, probably best picked up on that agenda item. But I mean, it's a highly relevant point, and we should make sure that we explain it and spend some time on it, if that's all right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comments? Okay, I will now read the recommendation. Audit Committee is recommended to note the contents of the report and comment upon or make recommendations to the Corporate Director of Resources on the level of assurance provided by the plan. To members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands, is the recommendation agreed? Thank you. 6, LB Newham State Accounts 2021 and 2023 update report. I invite the officer Minir Hall to give a brief introduction to the report. I will then open the floor to questions. Minir, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll start on a piece of good news. The report covers the audit certificates for 2016 to 2020-21, which have now been issued by the auditors. I think it involves some intervention from Conrad, and I'm sure he can talk on that issue as well, to try and resolve some of the issues regarding the early certificates, but they've now been issued, so everything is now, all the T's have been crossed and the I's dotted for that. So thank you to the auditors and Conrad from my personal point of view. So moving on, unfortunately, the 21-22 accounts have not yet been signed. We're in the final stages of that. We've been going through all the adjustments and now just cross-checking that everything matches. We agree with the auditors, or we discuss why we don't think figures should be that. And we're looking to be, well, I think we'll be in a position to discuss that with the auditors next week. So I'll set up a date with Karen to go through that. As members will be aware, a number of factors have delayed this. We've had the national issue regarding infrastructure assets. There has been a national issue in terms of audit resources across the board. We've been affected by the impact of the pension fund triennial valuation on the accounts as well. And then compounding that, we've had the preparation of the 22-23 accounts and some staffing issues, staffing resource issues as well. So I said we're working through that, so we're in the final stages. To give members some reassurance, Many of the changes in the accounts are presentational and affecting the notes. There are some that affect the primary statements, but these are regarding pension fund valuations and asset valuations, which don't affect the bottom line usable reserves position for the authority. So they affect the unusable reserves, things like technical things like the capital adjustment account and the revaluation reserve, which we can't touch anyway. They're just technical accounting adjustment codes. So that's to give some reassurance at that end. In terms of the 22-23 audit, that hasn't started, in part because we're still finishing the 21-22, but also auditors are waiting for further guidance from DLUC in how to resolve all the outstanding audits. Some of you may be aware that there are many local authorities across the country who have not just 21-22 outstanding, but 2021 and beyond. I think there's some maybe even going back to 16-17. So just waiting for that to see how to draw a line and see how we move forward from there. However, in relation to 22-23, we've had the audit inspection period, and there has been one objection to the accounts. This appears to be a London-wide issue. We know from colleagues at other authorities in London, they've had them, and I'm sure EY have picked up in others as well. And it relates to penalty charge notices on bus lane infringements and the appeals and photographic evidence in relation to that, and which cameras were allowed and the legislation. So we're working through the auditors and dealing with that objection, and hopefully we can get that one closed or resolved before the accounts are finally audited. And it's in terms of the value of any impact, it's not material. I think even the auditors would probably say it's a trivial amount in terms of us, but we have to go through due process and give the auditors have to do their review as well. So I think if Conrad wants to add anything.
Conrad.
You may also want to hear from the auditor in terms of the national context. So
yes.
Just on the matter of the certificates, because I know that was an issue that had been concerning the committee and also me. I'm very grateful to EY that those have now been brought up to date. Just for members of the public watching, you get sort of three outputs from the accounts, if you like. You get the auditor's opinion on your statement of accounts, that they're true and fair. You get their statement on what's called the value for money conclusion. Do we have the arrangements in place to secure, as far as reasonably practical, good value for money? And then at the conclusion of all of that and everything, the certificate says, and the audit is now closed and cannot be reopened in effect. So sometimes it's possible, for example, to have had the opinion on the accounts that are true and fair, but there's still an outstanding objection, and therefore the audit can't be completely closed. So those have now been brought up to date as far as possible to 2021, which is good news. Obviously, it's regretful that we haven't quite closed off 21-22, but hopefully we'll be there very soon. In terms of the wider picture, I think the issues have been rehearsed before, but it's kind of important enough, I think, to emphasise them again. There are a considerable number of issues affecting the delivery of accounts and the audit of them in the local government sector. And it's probably fair to say a kind of range of views as to which party or parties, across nationally, should be apportioned the blame for that, if you like. There are certainly some complex accounting issues, for example, on how roads and pavements and highways assets should be valued, that have been problematic right across the sector. I think it would be fair to say that there are certainly capacity issues in the audit firms, and indeed on the local authority side too, I'm sure, and also that at the moment there's sort of a bit of a kind of lack of real clear guidance from regulators such as the Financial Reporting Council and the National Audit Office as to how the audit should be approached, which is therefore leading to, as we've heard, not a great deal of work having been done on the 22-23 accounts. Lee Rowley, the local government minister, has written to colleagues across the sector, sort of emphasising that what he wants to see is a situation reset. It's clearly unsatisfactory to have statements of accounts that have not been audited, but he's very mindful of not wanting to sort of lose the value of that. I mean, the way I characterise it, if you like, those authorities that have got audits outstanding since 1920 or 1921, one can quite see that there's pretty limited value, I suppose, in concluding those audits, because the assurance you wanted from that, you wanted it 2 or 3 years ago, it's not really worth so much now. I think the more current you get in the audits, the more problematic it is to have work on them delayed. But obviously, some compromises are going to have to be made nationally in order for this situation to be resolved. So, the Newham's situation in that is by no means out of the ordinary at all. This is an issue right across the sector. So I wouldn't want anyone to think that means that, in some way, because we haven't done what we needed to, prepared a draft set of accounts and so on. But for those reasons, it's been unable to move very far forward at all with the audit of them. I think everyone is still waiting to see quite what the national response is in order to enable us to clear that backlog, because the consequence of this is obviously that you're not getting, the council's not getting, residents aren't getting the assurance that they would want to have from seeing the accounts being audited.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you, Conrad? Councillor Chowdhury might want to come in.
Sure.
So this, to me, this sounds really concerning. If it was a private company and they didn't have certified audits for 7 or 8 years, is that typical, first of all, with a private company? Because I would imagine that would probably undermine any investment in that company. And the second question is, it sounds like staff or officers are spending a lot of time working on audits from 5, 6, 7 years ago, which is probably detracting from focusing on current.
No, I may have inadvertently been slightly confused in my explanation of that. So let me just be clear. The opinion on our accounts, the audit opinion on our accounts in 2021 was given some months or even a year or more ago. Yeah, but those certificates were outstanding for a number of years, but no work was being done on those audits. It was just because the one from 2014-15 was sort of stuck in the system between the handover between 2 auditors. That one couldn't be issued until that one was issued, the one for 15-16 and 16-17 and so on.
But there's no one who's working on fixing a small error.
No, that wasn't because of outstanding audit work. It was until the logjam, which was caused by the transfer of audit responsibility from PricewaterhouseCoopers, EY's predecessors, to EY, which happened at the same time as the letting of the first set of contracts under the public sector audit appointments regime, which led to some sort of rather complex issues, I think, as to who was exactly supposed to sign what part of what certificate between the 2 auditors and indeed the NAO and others. That's what led to the sort of significant delay in the issuing of those. But there wasn't as though officers hadn't done some work that they were supposed to have done that was leading that delay. The cause of that delay lay outside the council's control.
It's probably happened in the private sector when the transition.
No, I don't think it does. But having said that, the arrangements for local authority audit are different to in the private sector. So, and colleagues from EY could speak better about this than me, because that's their expertise. But I don't think you do issue a certificate at the end of the audit in the same way, because the audit in the private sector just says the accounts are true and fair. There isn't an obligation on the auditor to declare, for example, that the arrangements for value for money are satisfactory. There isn't the right of a local resident to go to a private company and object to their accounts as there is in local government law, which the auditor is then obliged to consider and so on. So it's a kind of different arrangement to the private sector in that sense. I would agree with you that, the fact that our 21-22 accounts have not been, the audit of those has not been concluded is unsatisfactory. I would agree with you that the audit of our 22-23 accounts has not in any significant way commenced. That is also unsatisfactory. And I would agree, I didn't say it, I think it's a logical conclusion of what you were saying. I would agree with you that there is not yet a national clarity as to exactly how the audit of the 23-24 accounts, which haven't even been prepared yet and won't be for several months, it's not even clear how those will be done. So there are some serious national issues to be resolved, but I don't think the issue of the certificate is one where you should be concerned that the performance of the authority has been poor. It was an issue that I'm pleased has been resolved. But that hasn't led to a lack of assurance. It hasn't meant that you weren't confident that your accounts from 17-18 weren't right, and therefore everything you've done since then was based on unsolid foundations or anything like that.
Thank you, Conrad. Sorry, I'll just bring in Councillor Booker, please.
Sorry, I thought was that
Councillor Booker.
next. Okay.
Councillor Booker.
Thank you very much. So I was just wondering whether any local authorities in England didn't go with PSAA, and whether there's been any difference in terms of delays in the recent accounts, and also whether maybe I've misunderstood. It sounds like in 1.3 of this document that we are already at the end of a current 5-year thing with PSAA, and then presumably 18 months ago we were seeing whether we wanted to renew it. And so wondering when we made that decision to renew it, whether we already had concerns and whether that fed into our decision to renew or not, or whether there was a feeling that there just wasn't really another option because this is the way most local authorities were procuring. Thank you.
Yeah, no, those are really good questions. So when we considered whether or not to go with the next round of the PSA contracts, I think we were absolutely, I recall a long and pretty detailed discussion at the audit committee on it as to whether we should or not. I think the decisive factor was that under the PSA contract, it is the responsibility ultimately of the PSA to find us an auditor. And the capacity issues in the sector were such that, having spoken to, sort of informally at least, a number of the firms in the market, if there was I thought, and the committee agreed, a realistic prospect that if we didn't go down that route, we might be unable to secure an auditor at all. And therefore, the view reached, which I think was, the right one for all that we were very concerned about whether the PSA contract was delivering the value that we wanted, that it was better to stick with that than to run the risk of not being able to find ourselves an auditor at all. That was the view that the vast majority of local authorities took. I think I'm right that the City of London may have previously not been part of that regime, and there might be one or two other local authorities as well. But when we're talking, 2, 3, mostly a tiny handful of local authorities out of the 350 odd or so in the country that chose not to follow that regime. So, we were absolutely, aware of the issues that you raised when we decided to go with that contract, and concerned as to whether that contract would deliver. The situation has got considerably worse since that decision was taken, but I suspect that even had we gone outside of that regime and managed to find ourselves an auditor, we would probably not be in that different a position, because, for example, the issue of the way in which to value the highways asset, the roads and the pavements and so on, has not been resolved at a national level. So any auditor auditing will have to follow the guidance issued by the National Audit Office, who set the kind of code for that, whether by the PSA or not. And they haven't issued that guidance, and therefore, we would not be in a materially different position.
If I could just,
yeah, please.
No, if I could just ask if I'm kind of hearing something that I don't want to think I've heard something that you said that you haven't really said. would you consider that even though there were concerns 18 months ago, that actually it was probably still less risky to go this way, because at least if everyone's doing it, then everyone's in the same boat, and if there's problems, then nationally things have to happen because everybody's in the same boat?
Yeah, that was no question. That was absolutely part of the thinking of the committee at the time as well, which I agreed with. We knew that the significant majority of local authorities, at the very least, were going down exactly that same route. And you're right. I mean, it's under those circumstances quite brave to then say, well, we'll take a different route to that. And hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? And I think what I think was really good about Newham's arrangements was that decision wasn't just sort of done by the finance director. It wasn't just sort of thought about for a minute and then just signed without anyone thinking about it. I recall, probably at least a half hour's discussion, if not more, at the audit committee on precisely those points. Which is exactly the way the committee should work. We were well aware of the pros and the cons. The benefit of hindsight, probably we got the decision right, but even if we didn't, you can never sort of judge by hindsight. The point is that at the time, we gave it the attention that it deserved.
Thank you.
Councillor, please.
First of all, I'd like to, not having attended this committee before, I'd like to thank all the officers, partners and contractors for all the work that they've done that's got us to this point. And I totally understand the analogy of the logjam and why therefore you're waiting for the previous accounts to be cleared through so that the subsequent ones which have had all the work done on them can then be basically, ticked off and rubber stamped. Completely understand all of that. I think what concerns me as somebody new to all of this is thinking about the level of risk assessment that's undertaken to actually try and understand what may be influencing further delays in auditing in the future. So there's been mention of resourcing and capacity. Is that still an issue? Is that something that's being addressed? How's it being addressed? And are there any other risk assessment elements which are above and beyond those that are affecting the other councils nationwide?
Let me start with that again. It may be helpful if the committee may want to hear from the auditor too. The one thing that I ought to have said sooner that I'll just add in now, just for completeness. The legislative requirement is either to publish the audited accounts by the end of September, or else to publish, why they haven't been audited. So we're putting up something on the council's website to that effect later this week. The auditor's written to me, sort of short letter explaining the kinds of things that we've just been speaking about for that reason. But I ought to have just mentioned that. I think it is definitely true that resources in the public sector, the local authority audit market, are constrained. But colleagues from EY could talk about that better than I could. I think the balance that will need to be struck between how much audit work and therefore assurance you want about sort of years in the past versus just sort of trying to draw a line under those in some way, so that then at least going forward for 23, 24 onwards, we can have a system that is working properly again, because no one is satisfied about the fact that local authority accounts up and the country not being audited as they should be.
Yeah, I understand that, but my question was about risk assessment for future delays.
And so, just so I can clarify, when you mean risk assessment, do you mean risk assessment by the council that there may be further delays to the situation? So
none of us want this to happen again, do we? Because we're simply looking at the report that you're presenting. You guys have done all the work. You're the guys that stayed late and sweated over this to make sure that we are compliant and that this is done with due diligence.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say from a supportive point of view is what has been done to, maybe as a non-specialist, I don't have an idea that maybe there isn't any risk assessment you can do, and you're all thinking to yourself, oh, she doesn't understand.
No.
But what I'm saying is, you've talked about the capacity and resourcing in general for councils across the board. By resourcing, I don't just mean the money that we get from local government back from fees and fines and from council tax, but I'm also talking about, do you have the staff? Do you have the work person hours to actually cope with this level of work? Are you going to have to bring in very expensive contractors? Are you going to have to, make your people work overtime, which we know we don't pay money for? So are people going to be taking toil and exhausted? I think that's more my point of view as somebody that leaves the counting to other people.
Apologies for my misunderstanding.
But it's probably at too basic.
Clearly, the internal resourcing is a risk to future success of providing audited accounts. We've had some success in key teams. If I think about I won't go into too much detail. Our capital team is now fully resourced with permanent staff, and that's been recruited to over the last 12 months. So they've got 1 year of accounts under their belt. That particular team will be doing a lot of work, particularly with our plant, property and equipment, so the valuations in the accounts, and lots of the audit queries that we get do relate to those. So I think that's a good sign, and we've had some success there. There really is, it's a difficult market to recruit the accountants who really do the nuts and bolts and produce those statement of accounts. We've got a good setup really left with us from when we over-resourced with agency workers a few years ago, which we're using those templates and making those up. But we do have a key role that is vacant. It's covered by agency at additional cost, of course. That's the reality of the market that we're there. We have got a good agency worker in that position at the moment. It has been hard to find those suitable people, and certainly difficult to recruit permanently to those positions. We are an attractive proposition, I think, for future staff members, and we will continue to recruit into that team and consider that we've got exactly the right level of resource within the detail and the balance of teams that are under me. So it's something we're very conscious of. Would be a short answer to that. In terms of
one further question, in terms of all of that, which is great, and that does answer the question that I'm asking. Do you feel that you're working towards the sweet spot where you've got that combination of being able to offer, when you are recruiting, even if you may not always get the number of people you want to interview, a good proposition? You're saying that we look attractive, against actually training people up and having apprenticeships and having MA apprenticeships or whatever the equivalent is in accounting. It would be MSc at least, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think we're doing a bit of everything. I mean, we've got our trainees coming up, studying SIPFA, so they're coming that. And certainly in the accounts team, we get them trained up, and I do try and persuade them to stay. But we also do. I say personally, I think, because it's part of the reason it attracted me, it is an attractive proposition to come to New, and I do know colleagues in other authorities sort of say, what's your structure and your staffing thing, because they're having similar issues. So compared to other authorities, we are attractive, certainly in my opinion.
Andrew, please.
Just add a bit to that. So when we restructured the finance function for Newham and took bits out of one source and brought them into Newham, did design and implement a structure where someone could join as an AAT trainee, but probably more typically as a SIPFA trainee, so post-university, and progress through this sort of hierarchy. And it's not too hierarchical. We don't want to create we haven't created a really deep structure, but progress through that hierarchy and become and sit in Comrade's chair at some point in the future. So, or indeed beyond that level. That's the structure created. I suppose the first round of trainees that we've had through the SIPFA programme, so our graduate the programme targeted at graduates, are coming up to do their final exams in the next few months. But it doesn't just relate to them. I know particular individuals in Menda's team who've done really well combining a full-time job with studying as well. And we've been keen to support that and pay for that and grow our own. But it does take a bit of time. And there is always the risk as you train people that they do get poached. So it's a balance. Something I'm really invested in to grow our own and make a really strong team. We will need to bring people in there as well as part of that mix.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Chadder, please.
Very quick.
Then Colson.
And
I know you and then Colson.
Okay. Just a very quick question. You mentioned about the bus, and that's a national problem. It struck me. How do we treat kind of historic debts? And by that I mean we've just had a ruling against us from the Ombudsman about freedom passes. We're going back through an audit of trying to work out who was affected. How do we account for that? And how does the auditor view situations like that? So what I'm saying is if we're going back 10 years to find out, it's not a huge amount of money, but how do we account for that in auditing terms? We may have a debt that we don't quite understand the full extent of.
I think we'd have to make an estimation if as you said, the ruling, and there's an estimation, we either make a provision or we put it as part of the bad debt provision. It will be one of those two. And then again, that will be a judgment for Conrad and Andrew and maybe in discussion with the auditors.
On the specific point about freedom passes, and from recollection, I think the Ombudsman judgment was that a smallish number of people who, I mean, obviously a significant issue for them, but I think somewhere of the order of 50 people who may have been entitled to a freedom pass over the last few years, had not been issued one. Of course, that's a significant issue for those individuals. In strict accounting terms, if you find an error in a previous year's accounts, you can go through what is called a prior period adjustment to amend, to take account of that. You would only ordinarily do so for a much more financially significant item. So that one, the impact in terms of the council's accounts would be in the sort of thousands of pounds, I suspect, or something, which just wouldn't meet that test.
Interested in the principle of how, if a bigger situation arose, how you would adjust for it. So I presume that also implies to some extent to where there's problems with the bus issue at the moment. It's trying to find that.
But what we've actually, I think my understanding is that colleagues in the parking or who deal with the PCNs have actually quantified that, and it's a very, very small amount. It would be, I mean, the auditors would describe it as a trivial amount in terms of value.
We've done some work just estimating the value of the bus lane contravention issue, and concluded so far that it's trivial.
Thank you, Councillor Colson.
My point is about the certificates that have just been issued for the past. So you said that there's a letter that's going to be issued onto the website to state that all of this stuff has been happening and now all these certificates are coming out. Some of these certificates are stating qualified opinions, qualified value for money opinions, issues about governance and procurement processes in the past. Is there a risk that there's going to be a lot of residents saying, what's happening now? Is there a statement of some kind that has to be put out to say this was in the past? We've now got a robust process in place, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that, looks as very concerning, but actually you've got to put it out there that some of this was actually in the past and now it's dealt with and some of this is still being dealt with.
Yeah, so the most recent audit for 2021, showed very significant progress against that. And in 21-22, and again, please approach me or correct me, but I think you were satisfied in terms of the value for money arrangements that the kind of issues disclosed in these historic certificates had been addressed. But so I think the strict answer to your question, I mean, you're absolutely right about the point about making sure that the messaging is correct. I think it just highlights again, though, doesn't it? The problem with the delays in the audit system, because in a sense it's sort of perhaps a bit historically interesting whether Newham's arrangements were right in 2015-16 or not. The thing is, you're not going to find out from the auditor formally their view on 22-23 for quite some time at the very least, and that is the problem, because you can ask me for my opinion, of course, and I'll say, well, I think it's all great, but it's precisely the value of that external independent scrutiny that the current national problems, I mean, you don't get the benefit of that.
Does that answer your question, Colson?
Yeah, sort of, but is there I'm just thinking about the residents who see this and say there were all these issues. Is there going to be, is it worth there being something to say that was historic? Just maybe just a letter has to be put in a way that people don't jump out and say, why is this a problem? And you're trying to say, no, this is the past, we've dealt with it. But when residents read it, it's not necessarily what's gonna.
No, I think that's a really good point. We'll make sure we do that. We'll have to publish this in the next couple of days anyway, so we'll pick that up as part of that on the website. Thank you.
So Councillor Booker had to leave.
Okay.
There's no.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay. I'll now read the recommendation. The committee is recommended to consider and note the contents of this report and any verbal updates. The members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands is the recommendation agreed? Thank you. Item 7, year ahead forward plan. This report sets out the items to be considered at each meeting for the municipal year. I ask the committee consider if any items should be added to the forward plan. Yes, please.
Two items, and forgive me, I haven't looked at the plan recently.
Yeah.
I sent you an email regarding my concerns around the corporate complaints process. Yes. Can I ask that be added?
Yes, that
plan going forward. In addition to that, and slightly related to that as well, another issue has arisen, which I don't think needs to be a full item, but maybe just a paper for this committee's about information governance.
Okay.
It has come to our attention at overview and scrutiny that there are records that may not be there, or there's a lack of data around the resident satisfaction survey, and it would be helpful to have assurances that we have got the right information governance systems in place going forward, that we're not losing data.
Yes. Just going back on your point about the complaints, that is due to come in November.
Can I check if that's about this year's corporate complaints process, or if it's about the concerns raised about last year's report?
No, it says the annual complaints report and handling of any report from the local government ombudsman annual report for 23-24, that residents' demographic data and the quality of their complaints response be included in future reports to the committee.
So could I make a request that we also have alongside that item a reflection on what has arisen since the publication of the last report?
Can that be added, please, Pauline?
A reflection on what has arisen since the last report.
Connor, did you have comments?
Oh,
Yes, so that can be added under.
Thank you.
Pauline, you got Councillor Chadder's other point.
Information
governance. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Any other comments? Okay. The members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands, is the report noted? Thank you. Item 8, date of the next meeting. The date of the next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, the 2nd of November, 2023. The clerk has advised me that the last 2 meetings for the committee for the municipal year fall on a Wednesday, and one member is not able to attend on Wednesdays. I've therefore asked the clerk to investigate alternative dates for these meetings. This concludes tonight's business. Before we end the meeting, I'd like to wish good night to everyone who was watching on YouTube. I now declare the meeting closed and ask the clerk to stop the YouTube broadcast and to confirm to the committee when the live stream is ended. Thank you, Pauline.